up, guys? Brad Chappell back with you at the Crappie Connection. Got two special guys with me today. It's going to be a fun topic that I've actually been wanting to do for a long time now and can't wait to get the show off, but I'll let everybody do a little introduction.
Yeah, my name's Ryan Jones. I'm the Assistant Director of the Fisheries Bureau for Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
I'm Hayden Jefferies. I'm from right here in Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who Hayden is on the show as well, but he probably didn't need an introduction, but we got him anyway. But, you know, I met Ryan last year, and he did the main seminar, I guess you would say, or meeting for Lake Washington and kind of what you guys were doing in store with it. And
Right. We just had some public concerns about the fishery over there at Lake Washington.
yeah, we went through and you talked about really what you guys do when you go in and you investigate a lake like you did Lake Washington. And let's kind of give a rundown how you kind of went about Lake Washington even.
So Lake Washington, just like any other fishery, is just, they're all so dynamic. There's so many different things that are in play that are causing a fish population to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's going to be the habitat, the environment that they're living in. It can oftentimes be very stressful, and Lake Washington definitely has that type of late summer environment where basically the surface temps are too hot for the fish to exist, and then you have just anoxic or areas in deep water that don't have a lot of oxygen, and so it really just squeezes those fish into a smaller area to utilize in the water and water column. So we look at that, and then we look at other species that are present in the water body, such as white bass. Though you may not think that they would compete with crappie as much as they do, and you can basically walk across that lake for the shad that's in it. You think as long as they have enough to eat, it should be fine. But white bass do predate on young of the year crappie, and we don't know exactly to what extent that has an effect on the population. But when I first went over there and we started sampling it with the nets looking for crappie, we really just saw some of the biggest white bass I'd ever seen. So just knowing that those fish are out there and they're eating. Even if they're in the column and they only eat mostly shad, they're still going to be opportunistic feeders. They're still going to, if a young ear crappie is there, they're not going to not eat it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, and so when you're squeezing fish into a smaller area and those fish are cruising back and forth, it could definitely have an effect on that population. Now, the results of that sampling showed that, so we run these nets out there, and then we collect a certain number per size group and actually age them. It looked like we had missed a class in 2020. We didn't get, I think we had like one fish, one black crappie from that class, and then no white crappie at all, from that class. And so it just looked like we missed a class just naturally, and sometimes that happens. With crappie, they are cyclical in nature, the way they spawn. Much different than Barnett. Barnett seems to have the most stable spawn, even when they don't have a good spawn.
They have a great spawn.
Still a good spawn.
The water level is always consistent for the most part, and then they've always got that vegetated cover throughout to really allow for good recruitment, a lot of food there. A lot of nutrients and food for young and ear crappie to survive and to recruit to the fishery.
Kind of my thought when it went to Lake Washington, and I've fished Lake Washington for 15 years now, I guess. From tournaments to play fishing or what have you, and everybody say it was all just because overfishing, and honestly, my set was I really think we missed a spawn somewhere, and that population, to my mind, was like, all right, we're missing a spawn. That's really what's causing, because it's kind of like us in my mind anyway. And I know you guys are way more complex on how you study things, but if you don't have those young year class, Well, they don't get big enough where you can catch them. So
That's right.
the spawn is so critical, I think, with these lakes with population for crappie.
For sure, and that's when the angler perceives it. You
Yeah.
know, it's that many years later when normally those 4-year-olds are out there, 3 and 4-year-old fish are out there. They're starting to recruit to the angler gear, and so the accident happened a few years ago. The angler didn't understand that it happened until 3 or 4 years later, when that big class of fish should be there, available for exploitation. You know, from the anglers, and they're just not. And so that's when it's perceived. But you know, when we another factor that went into this when we did that sampling, we caught all different types of fish, but they were all in low abundance.
Yeah.
All of them,
Yeah.
not just crappie. You know, we had crappie from all different size groups. You know, I think it was in the neighborhood of 40% of the fish that we caught were above the minimum link limit. You know, so I mean, typically when you think about over exploiting a fish population, then you're going to collect a bunch of young fish, and there's nothing above that link limit.
Right.
You know, and that just wasn't the case. It was just low abundance, period.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was kind of like that for all the fish species. So I think just had, there's a carrying capacity associated with how that environment, how tough that environment is to survive at late summer, and some years it's fine. And I mean, every year is going to be different. There's going to be long periods of that anoxic, portion down there, and they can survive some of that. But it's the duration, the longer they have to endure it, the more stress that they take on. They may survive the year, but they don't survive next year, kind of deal. It's kind of additive, that stress on the fish population.
Like on Lake Washington, what is the typical lifespan of those crappie? 6 years old, 8 years old? What would you say the typical lifespan of a crappie on Lake Washington, or some of the oxbows? We'll say eagle, and we'll throw all of them in the mix.
I mean, typically you're not going to see a whole lot of fish over 6, but they do get a little older than that. I'm trying to think of what the oldest one I saw on Barnett was, but I mean, I guess if they're not caught, and they're able to survive, the environment, then 5 or 6 years old is typical, but I mean, that it's just all dependent, on all these other factors, that you're laying out there. I just think I don't know where I was going with that. Go ahead.
But I think you guys went up there and you did your samples, and it wasn't coming back to what you think it should have been. What was the next step in y'all's thought process as far as, hey, we need to do something to, help this lake out, to say?
So we wanted. So again, people were blaming on overfishing.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, I think there was some of that. That is another factor. With Archibald being down, and some of the other, it just puts more pressure on a water body that's not that big and not that deep. Some people want to compare it to eagle. It's not that big, and it's not that deep.
Yeah.
But it does have the capability of growing some of the biggest crappie in the state without question, especially with a reduced abundance like this. Like, those crappie can really grow so fast. I mean, in 2 years, really be at that 12 inches, like, in 2 years, which is pretty crazy, because on Barnett they would be more along the lines of 9 inches or something.
Yeah. I know what I've seen so far on Barnett, and Hayden can chime in there. The population, what I see is we've got a really good spawn this year, which I love, but also we've got a lot of that, 9 to 10 and a half
inch, 2-year-old fish.
And that's what I used to see in Washington was, we'd go out there and all of a sudden, early in the year, you really didn't catch a lot of smaller fish, but as the spring progressed and it got towards the tail end of the spawn, I mean, you would have days where you just caught nothing but short fish. Those 4 or 5 inch fish just seemed like nonstop. And that's what I kind of noticed. It was just kind of dwindling on the small fish, and then I knew what was going to be the next step, because if you didn't have small fish, you wouldn't go have bigger fish. But I want you to come back and think about, all right, we noticed that lake was needing some extra help, and you decided to propose what kind of next step for the lake.
Yeah, we knew we needed to do a little something, so we went ahead and devoted a little bit of pond space and hatcheries to try to go ahead and stock some advanced size white and black crappie. Those are still at Bob Tyler Fish Hatchery right now, and trying to wait for the temps to cool off so we can put them in without hurting them. And so that's really what we're waiting on for that. But we base our stocking, on the bio's request, and that's based on sampling data and an actual trigger in the fisheries management plan associated with an objective.
So it's going to be stocked again, or is it going to be stocked in the future?
It will be stocked this fall.
It will be stocked this fall. Any estimate
so we
on
weren't
numbers?
Prepared the request wasn't in. With a hatchery, you got to have the request a year in advance. So when we kind of determined that something needed to be done, then we needed to kind of request it, and the hatchery had to have the space to get that done. And so that's kind of how it. We can't just can't just snap your fingers and they're there. You gotta. It's a process. I got to prepare for. And so we had some that were already kind of planned for different lakes. We had some that we were able to carry to Washington, some black crappie. But this year we're trying to get both black and white crappie in there.
What size will they be when you put them in the lake?
I think the last time I heard, it seemed like the whites were in pretty good. I don't really want to say because I'm not sure which one was which. Like the whites were around 3 inches and the blacks were 2, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to have that size, that just 2 to 4 inch fish, to get out there, and hopefully they'll survive.
Yeah.
So I want to mention another thing about the Barnett fishery and especially when we, kind of the rig changed on the Big Four, that's needed. There's just such different fisheries, but like when that comes out, everybody thinks we need that same rig on everybody in the state. And nothing can be further from the truth for Barnett, because the exploitation that occurs on Barnett, which is pretty intense, helps the fish population. If you did not have those fish coming out, they're not going to grow as fast. You're not going to be catching as big a crappie on Barnett if we put a link limit. And we throw a link limit on there. Like, we need to get some weight out of there so that they have some room to grow,
I know I always have people when they come from out of state and they're like, hey, what's the size limit here on Barnett? And I'm like, man, whatever you feel comfortable keeping is the size limit on Barnett. And then of course, you don't want to keep extremely small fish, and I always try to, guide people to saying, hey, keep what you need and let's let go of the rest. And I think that's kind of the future of management on the fisherman side of things is, we're going to always have to think, what do we need and what do we need to keep? Like Hayden and myself, I mean, we have no need to keep, 40 bags of fillets in our freezer. There's no need for it anymore, because now with the technology that we have, a good fisherman that's really good at forward-facing sonar can go out any time of year and catch fish. When I was a child many moons ago, we only pretty much fished during the spawn, from March all the way through April, and then occasionally once, you'd go up by the 43 bridge and fish that area. But for the most part, it was a springtime deal, and man, there's people every single day now fishing because you can catch them now. That's right. A lot easier. But what's y'all's mindset when it comes to this, the new technology out, and what are you foreseeing?
The data shows that it works, and it works really well. It shows that people catch bigger fish and they catch more fish and that sort of thing, and that they harvest more fish. And that may change at some point in time, and a lot of people are new to the technology, and so they're not they don't quite know how to use it yet. And so when all these people get it and they all learn how to use it, what does that affect at that time? I think it's going to continue to amp up, but all we are going to do is just continue to monitor it and as needed, protect it. That's just all we can do. And also we got to think about as far as a natural resource agency, we have to manage for everybody. This isn't about just managing for trophy fish. We have to think about those people who are trying to catch a mess to eat and take it home and make sure that they're took care of too.
Yeah. There's all kind of fishermen that just want to feed their family to say.
Right.
I love to eat them.
It's good eating fish.
Yeah, I probably don't have 5 bags of fish in my freezer after Brad says that, though. I prefer to eat them fresh, so if I want some fish, I'll just go try to catch them, a couple days in advance. And I don't see the need to stockpile a freezer anymore because we can fish for them year-round with this technology.
I know, Hayden's the new generation of crappie fishermen, and, it's good to see that the younger guys are catching on to this technology and the sport because, once it's kind of like the scenario on a bad spawn. If we don't have guys to replace us, we're in trouble in this sport.
That's a fact. We rely on anglers, buying licenses. So, right. We need Hayden.
Yeah.
We need all his buddies.
Yeah, I can say over the last couple of years, you're seeing more and more of the younger kids getting into it, and I think the technology is kind of what's drawing them that way. It's a little bit easier for them to go, figure it out and catch fish, and I know it definitely helped me. I did a lot of crappie fishing before the technology came out, but I definitely rapidly progressed as an angler once it was around.
I know when we talk about things that the department needs from anglers as far as input and things like that, what are some of the things that, hey, that would be good to hear more from the anglers on? Good, bad, and ugly to say. What are some of the things that would help you guys out? Or
typically we just we do access creel surveys where we're talking to the anglers about their trip, what they were targeting, what they caught, what they threw back. Honesty, in a survey would be good. I think most folks do, but yeah, just allowing us to put hands on fish. Most folks do. Like I said, some people don't want you in their boat, but we ask that anglers comply so we can get the best data possible, so we can make the best decision possible.
I know, like Eagle Lake this year, it's kind of been a phenomenal. I think if you could rate it, 1 out of 10, it should have been a 12 as far as the quality of fish and just the abundance of fish. And I know a lot of guys were like, well, why didn't they implement dropping the daily limit on Eagle like they did Washington? What was some of the differences why that didn't happen in your mind?
So we use modeling to so we'll sample and we'll put all this data into a model that kind of spits out what length limit would be best to maximize the amount of fish that you can yield from a fishery, and that 11 inch is what that was. So when we did that, of course, you have to do it with Louisiana. Yeah. Not only does it run through our commission, it runs through Louisiana's commission, and so it's a to-do, and so we just did it based on that because that is the objective in the FMP, to maximize yield of crappie in Eagle Lake, and so that's just the objective at this time. So.
What was y'all's stance on Eagle as far as your classes and the studies that you've seen on Eagle? How's it looking on the biology side of things?
Eagle Lake is cyclical like the rest of them. When I first got involved in it, they had already done one sample with the lead nets, and they couldn't have caught any more black and white crappie in that first sample. And then we went back 2 years later and caught all white crappie and no black crappie, or very few black crappie. And then went back, and then it was all black crappie and no white crappie. It's just like we didn't really have as good of data as we wanted because they weren't available, to sample. but it just shows the cyclical nature of that species and how it makes it difficult. It's not necessarily what the anglers are doing to the population. It's what the fish, the environment in which they spawn. How are they doing that? How is it cyclical? Why? That sort of thing. We really don't have a good grasp on that. You stick these fish that are river fish in a pond, and they may not spawn for 4 or 5 years, and then all of a sudden it's boom, it's huge spawn that can ruin a small impoundment. And it's really we don't really know the reason why they pick certain times of spawn like that. It's kind of strange. Maybe we can crank up some research on something like that.
Like on Washington or an eagle or the oxbows, is a high water spring really a good element for a great spawn? Or what would be, in your mind, the ideal spawn for some of these lakes up along the river there?
I would just say just early year discharge rates, like the amount of water that's coming in, because that's good for shad. And typically if you got a lot of shad, you're going to have good recruitment of whatever spawned. You can't have a big spawn and not a lot of shad because you don't have the recruitment or the survival of that young of the year. All of those things need to be replaced. So let's get the forage base. I'd vote on forage base first.
Have some food.
And then even if they had a poor spawn, if all of them survive and recruit, then we still have a class. And so early year discharge, I think, is probably more of the key.
Do you see the state leaning more in the future to trying to manage lake by lake, particular than just that wide net of things? I know the Core Lakes, and it's probably a whole different animal when it comes to management on that side up there. But I would think, and I would hope that the future kind of holds, the daily limits and the size limits are going to really have to trend with the aid of new sonar, and who knows what's going to come out in the future as far as that goes. But,
right.
I think ideally in my world, in Hayden's world, these lakes are going to have to go towards more really fine-tuning one-on-one. What would be y'all's stance on that? I mean,
most are, so those flood control reservoirs, and that's a great question, which I would rather Keith Mills answer.
Yeah,
to be completely honest, because he runs that show up there. So
he's been doing it a long time too.
Yeah, and we've had good fishery up there for a long time. So good fisheries. So whatever he's doing it right. He just realized that with Archipelago down and the low water years, and I think he mentioned that there was a low class as well out there. I think same year, 2020. And just with just all these different factors that are piling up, that if we didn't do something, you're going to turn around and say, oh, we should have. And so it's really trying to get in front of it for all the flood control reservoirs up there. Was the idea there.
What about Okeechobee? I know. Are you playing with that one over there at all, or how does it look?
That place just doesn't grow them real big, they just do not grow fast over there. I know my predecessor, Larry Bull, he had put a 10-inch minimum length limit on Okeechobee, and they ended up pulling it off because they just weren't. They really needed to be caught. There's a pile of fish. They just grow really slow. So you didn't want to further complicate that by not allowing people to harvest, because then we're getting back to what I was talking about on Barnett. Like, you really rely on the harvest to allow for some faster growth.
I got a question for you, and it come up on a Facebook post I seen over the weekend, but and Hayden, I don't know if you've seen this or not, or what do you think about it, but white crappie fillets and black crappie fillets look different.
There's a difference. And
I don't know, would that be because of diet in your mind? What would, Have you ever even noticed that?
Shape, I mean, certainly
not really. It's
shape,
the color,
and maybe even a little texture, in a way.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've paid enough attention to.
I mean, somebody asked me about it this weekend
to even pay attention to that.
But I picked it up about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was like, that fillet, catch on Barnett on a typical day, unless we go up the river system up on the north end, we primarily catch, I'd say 70 to 90% white crappie, and you'll throw in a few black crappie here and there. But, you could pick out of a bowl of fillets the black crappie.
Huh. I've never paid attention to that. Keith may have an answer to that one too, So
I threw you a little curveball there.
Yeah,
you probably wasn't expecting them. and like somebody asked me about it, and it's like, the only thing I could think of, it was probably because of diet.
I mean, that makes sense, I mean, those fish are going to kind of be using different spaces, and feeding on different things. I mean, they're both shad eaters predominantly, but, you're going to expect the black to maybe do a little something different up in the timber.
What are the crappie with a black stripe down? I don't know, in Barnett we've got a lot of them.
Yeah, so black stripe, black crappie, that's just a phenotypic trait, or what they, it's just a color trait of a black crappie. So they're just naturally out there in the population. They're not hybrids. They're just black stripe, black crappie. Just
a genetic gene or what have you?
When we were trying to do the Magnolia crappie, we were using a black stripe, black crappie to hybridize, just so we could try to mark them. That was but they don't all mark. I think it was something like, it would range. I mean, it could be 50% of them would have a stripe, 90% would have a stripe.
It seems over the last 2 or 3 years I've seen more black nose, black stripe. What's the terminology really for them? Black nose?
I mean, black stripe, black crappie is what I've always called.
Would it be more of a black crappie then?
They are definitely black crappie.
I got you.
No.
So what about in the last year or two? I know you've seen it too. There's some white crappie swimming around out there, and they'll have a black dot here, or they'll have a black dot here. I'm guessing at some point that fish has some black in his genes.
Probably
somewhere.
Some hybridization. Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing it more and more in the last couple of years.
I mean, tell you, you can tell. I mean, typically the big fish, y'all's tournaments are hybrids. I mean, when you hold them up, those jokers are hybrids for the most part. That's just it's what they call hybrid vigor. When you hybridize two individual species that don't normally reproduce, that they have a phenomenon called hybrid vigor, where they just grow a little faster, kind of like the
do they have
hybrid striped bass. Like when we were to hybridize those, they grow faster than a normal sea run or white.
Does a hybrid have a shorter lifespan?
I don't know the answer to that for sure.
I'm getting you good now.
I mean, I wouldn't think there's much of a difference. I don't know if we have any data that suggests otherwise. Your big fish are always hybrids, so they're old. So I wouldn't think it shouldn't be too.
I know, like on Barnett, and you mentioned shad based, and almost I think we've got too much shad sometimes out there.
A lot of shad out there.
There's tons of it.
I mean, I would be hard pressed if you said take me to an area that's not loaded with shad. I don't know if I could take you to it. It'd have to be a foot of water or something, but literally I can't find an area on that lake that's just not
covered up.
I mean, it is crazy.
Yep. So it makes it good,
Yeah.
Because they don't have to go very far to find food.
Right.
It's all about energetics, and those fish, when they have to search for a long period of time to find food, they're burning energy. And so when they finally find it, then they has to go back to everything else that their body has to do. And if they can put all that energy toward gonadal development and the spawn, ends up having a good spawn.
Bigger population.
So it's
do crappie spawn in the fall?
Man, I mean,
typically,
I would say not typically, but that's just really my opinion. I guess I don't. When we see young of the year crappie, it's going to be. We typically don't see young of the year crappie like in the spring like that small. But I'm not saying it's not possible because crappie are so kind of crazy with the way that they do spawn. I mean, those start early, and some of them will be a lot later. And I mean, just like with bass too. I mean, you got those some of those juggers they're spawning in February, and I mean, some of them don't spawn until June.
Is there a noticeable difference between when black crappie and white crappie spawn, temperature range wise, or?
I don't think there's much of. There probably is a slight difference, but I don't. As far as that exact biology between the two, I'm not for certain if that exists, like a definite temperature difference. Had to review the lit.
I could get you. What are some of the other things that you get a lot of questions about from the anglers that you would like to throw out there for and say, hey, all right, I don't have to search on the internet to find this answer. What are some of the common questions you get asked as a biologist for the Department of Wildlife?
I mean, it's typically the link limit stuff. People want to know why we're not doing the same thing on one water body as we do the other. I think we've kind of covered a lot of that. Just knowing that each water body has its own set of factors that really cause the fish population that the anglers out there perceive and that they're able to catch. And each one's different. So.
All right, Ryan, I think I've got it. Hayden, you got anything you want to throw at him real quick?
Do y'all study the hybrid crappie a lot? As far as
we had a lot of this. We were studying when we were doing the hybridization of them. We did that for the state lakes. We really wanted to create this hybrid crappie that was sterile, so that it wouldn't interfere so much with the bass and brim populations in our state lakes, and so we could control the numbers better. That was the idea. Have a fast-growing fish that we could control the numbers of. But we were seeing that a lot of our state lakes were so bass crowded that they were really just eating the majority of them. And so there was only certain situations where it was good to do it. And we've kind of put that program on the back burner for a while. But, there's always opportunities to maybe bring it back. And we've discussed a little bit of that as well.
How bad do you think the Asian carp hurt some of those oxbows along the river system?
I really think Asian carp they're a non-issue until they get to a certain density, because there's so much nutrients in those delta oxbows that it's basically a space that's been a void that hasn't been filled, and they're utilizing that. Now, when they get to a certain point where they start reducing that primary production, that phytoplankton that's out there for recruiting, for sport fish recruitment, for those for the survival of the sport fish spawns, all those larval fish need zooplankton, right off the bat. And so if they are in a density that is reducing that, then they will absolutely have an impact on the sport fish population. We've done some sampling in like Lake George, for instance, and the paddlefish that we saw they're just completely emaciated. I mean, just there were so many invasive carps that they were able to reduce that plankton, and that's a direct competitor with them. Now, like for instance, the Asian carp that are on Lake Washington, if they're not bothering the shad population, they're a non-issue because that's a direct competitor. That's my opinion on it. And a lot of people, have varying opinions about the effect, that they have on sport fish. But I just feel like it's a density thing.
So if you're seeing a lake that has Asian carp and you have an abundance of shad, it's probably not really affecting them to the point then.
That's right, because if the shad are healthy, then they're eating the same thing. Then how in the world could it be detrimental if they're not even affecting the direct competitor?
So that's a telltale sign. If I've got a lake and it used to have a lot of shad and now we've got the Asian carp, well, that's probably then affecting the shad.
I would say it definitely could be an issue. A factor that's affecting sport fish or forage, populations.
Well, Ryan, I'm gonna get you to do this again now.
Okay.
It wasn't that painful. I got you on here today.
Maybe a couple. Maybe I'll have some answers for them next time.
Absolutely. I'll give you a little sheet up beforehand.
Yeah. Give me a heads up, man.
I try to, but I definitely appreciate your time coming on here today.
Appreciate the invite.
Mate, guys, hit that subscribe button and ask some questions on here. Believe me, Ryan knows I'll call him and text him. He'll be like, all right, I'm driving right now, Brad. Let me call you back. But
Give me 20.
I definitely appreciate all the hard work you guys do. And I know it's not always think, but on our side of things, as far as what I get to do and enjoy the species of crappie, hey, Mississippi's king for a reason because of guys like you. So thank you on our side of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. And thank y'all for getting the word out, about the natural resources from this great state,
Yeah, absolutely. We got Brad Chappell here, Ryan Jones,
Hayden
Jefferies. Next time, holla.
About a mile from Big Muddy River, a place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away.